morning and thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to our special program, Russian Invasion. I'm Ladi Akeredoluale. The headlines. UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson fights for political survival as he prepares to face MPs today following the resignation of prominent members of his government. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi over Ukraine, but will not meet Sergei Lavrov of Russia. And the war in Ukraine moves to another level as bombing destroys Sloviansk market. At least 2 people are dead. But we begin with the news that came out overnight that the Secretary General of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo, has died aged 63. According to the Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Mele Kyari, Mr. Barkindo died very late on Tuesday evening. He is said to have died at about 11 p.m. Mr. Kyari says this is certainly a great loss to his immediate family, the NNPC, our country Nigeria, OPEC, and the global energy community. Earlier on Tuesday, Mr. Barkindo had been honored by President Muhammadu Buhari at the State House in Abuja for his work at OPEC. The president then had described him as a worthy ambassador of the country. His tenure as OPEC Secretary General was scheduled to end at the end of this month. Let's talk to our energy correspondent, Olu Phillips, who joins us live from Abuja. Good morning to you, Olu. This is certainly a tragedy and is coming at a very, very challenging time for OPEC, especially because it is in the midst of certain challenges which it is facing. What more are you learning about Mr. Barkindo's passing?
Ladi, good morning to you and good morning to everyone. I haven't had much sleep since yesterday evening, late night yesterday, when this news started filtering in that the man I interviewed yesterday evening, strong, when he saw me, he shook my hands because we've had a lot of cooperation between Channels Television and OPEC. Ladi, you can attest to this. I mean, you've covered the industry, the energy industry, for many, many years, and you worked also with Barkindo. I took over from you to continue this work, and we've worked closely with Barkindo here on Channels Television. He gave us an interview yesterday evening, which I conducted, and promised to have a more sit-down, exclusive interview between himself and us, as far as his days, his years in OPEC is concerned, his work is concerned. Recall also that this interview should have held in Vienna, but for exigencies of his travels and his handing over ceremonies and his handing over to the new OPEC Secretary General, a Croatian, who's also a diplomat, all of that has not happened. We moved the interview to Houston. It was also a very tough time. We couldn't have it in Houston. We just had a sideline with him. And all Mr. Barkindo has lived for, especially in the twilight of his days at OPEC, is to see a stability in the energy markets and supply. Barkindo brought to this sector and to this industry and to the global economy the stability that has never been seen before. Remember that this industry has been hit by 2 cycles, the downturn in 2015 and 2016, and the pandemic in 2019, when oil prices fell. As we were in Vienna in that early February of 2020, when oil prices plummeted to about $47. Today, oil is selling for as of yesterday, $115 to the barrel, and that has to do with a lot of the galvanizing and the pulling together of everyone who needed to help this market stabilize. For instance, in 2016, he initiated a move and a strategy to what you call the OPEC cooperation with non-OPEC members and non-producing countries to come together and see how the market can be supplied and how production can be stabilized. So whilst a lot of people had seen OPEC as an international organization of cartels that just fix prices, Barkindo has changed that narrative to become an international organization that is now being seen as a very critical part of world economy. Look at what's happening in the world today as regards energy supply. Today, the statistics are not looking good. 30% loss in terms of revenue, in terms of investment in production globally. 1.5 million barrels of oil lost every year daily owing to supplies and supply shortfalls. Barkindo, in his wisdom, has also been asking that geopolitics and economy and politics do not interfere in energy issues. So, for instance, he's a very strong advocate of what is happening, for instance, in Venezuela and in Iran. He's been pushing to see how these people can come back into the supply market and not be affected by the politics of what's going on in their region. So, for instance, we are losing close to 2 million barrels from Iran, almost that numbers from Venezuela. Today's supply receipts from the US producers are not enough to cover up, for instance, for the shortfall that we are seeing that is being exacerbated by the war between Russia and Ukraine. And you can see that he's one Secretary General that appeals to every member and every representative at OPEC. Once he's at the saddle, you will see the Novaks of this world from Russia. You will see the oil minister from Saudi Arabia agreeing. Remember that Russia is a major supplier. Remember that Saudi Arabia is also a major supplier. And most times and sometimes they do not agree because they have the power of supply. These are people that can produce crude at less than $10 and still make humongous profit. These are people that turn out about 3 million barrels a day without batting an eyelid. But when the market is oversupplied, Barkindo has the willing powers. He's got that oil that has the way of speaking to these authorities, speaking to these oil countries to cut down on supply and make sure that stability is equated with what a good pricing in terms of oil per barrel. Remember that Nigeria also depends on this in terms of its budgeting allocation and budgeting planning, benchmarking on what the price of crude is, and all of that. What he has brought to OPEC cannot be said in one program. This is a man that joins OPEC.
I actually wish that we could see more visuals of Mohammed Barkindo. We have quite a lot of material on him, which I expect that our producers will put up even as you speak, Olu. That's why I stepped in. We have him at the meeting with the president yesterday in Abuja, which would be his last public outing before this tragic event. And of course, before that, he was at the NOG of 2022, where he indeed, and so he's been around. But I would want to ask you, do we know anything about what will now happen? Because, of course, having passed on, we do know that Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo is a colossus in the energy, in the oil and gas industry. His tenure, in fact, hasn't ended. It was due to end at the end of this month. That's at the end of July, when he was then expected to take up an appointment at the Atlantic Council. But do we know what is to happen? Will he, for example, be buried today? What are you hearing?
I've spoken to friend and confidant in OPEC who also traveled with him, Mr. Hassan, and the OPEC family is in great shock. As a matter of fact, reading some messages from them, I'm listening to them. They wish it was a mix-up in terms of names or something, but hey, what can we do? The latest information I'm hearing is that he'll be buried today, barring any last-minute changes. He'll be buried today at 4 p.m. in Yola. Channels Television is keeping a tab on that. We'll see how we can bring visuals and live visuals from that burial if it's not a private one. But this man is a global citizen. Barkindo is a colossus. Barkindo cannot be discussed. That Barkindo is an encyclopedia of world diplomacy. Barkindo will be missed. I will miss him. Channel's family will miss him. The energy community will miss him. The global community will miss him. And his tenure is not over. When we spoke last in Houston in March and in May, he told me, I'll be back. I'll be back in July to attend the NOG. We can have our conversations. And by end of July, I'll travel back to Vienna for the handover to the new OPEC Secretary General, who was elected sometime in the first quarter of this year. So, Indeed. As it were, in his capacity yesterday, he was still, unfortunately, Ladi, we're using the word was now for yes. Barkindo. He was still the serving Secretary General of OPEC, the 28th or 26th, if I'm not mistaken, of the Secretary Generals. He will be missed. Ladi,
he will indeed. Olu, thank you for the perspective. Please keep informed, keep on top of the story. We'll be getting back to you throughout the course of the day for the update. Thank you very much, Olu Phillips. Another breaking story is Boris Johnson, this time in the United Kingdom, that is, where Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is fighting for political survival after two of his top ministers attacked his leadership and then resigned. Chancellor Rishi Sunak and Health Secretary Sajid Javid quit within 10 minutes of each other, followed by a flurry of junior ministers and aides. Neither Mr. Javid nor Mr. Sunak have publicly spoken since standing down, but their resignation letters yesterday night were highly critical of the Prime Minister. Mr. Javid had warned the leadership was not acting in the national interest, while Mr. Sunak said the public expected government to be conducted properly, competently, and seriously. Bim Afolabi, who quit as vice chair of the Conservative Party live on TV, said Downing Street's handling of the Chris Pincher affair had been really appalling, and he could no longer defend that sort of behavior. And as expected, the resignations of top UK ministers and the plight of the Prime Minister have been dominating all the newspaper headlines this morning. A great number of lawmakers in his ruling Conservative Party have said the game is up for Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson's leadership has been mired in scandals and missteps over the last few months, with the Prime Minister fined by police for breaking COVID-19 lockdown rules, and a damning report published about the behavior of officials at his Downing Street office who breached lockdown rules. And the leader of Britain's opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, says he will welcome a snap election and that the country needed a change of government after Mr. Johnson lost two of his key ministers who quit yesterday. Asked by a reporter if he would support a national election if one was called in the next 2 weeks, Mr. Starmer said, yes, we need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government at this time.
We need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government, and this government is collapsing. The Tory party is corrupted, and changing one man at the top of the Tory party won't make any difference. It won't fix the problems. Let's have a fresh start for Britain. Let's have a real change of government. And Tory cabinet ministers have been cheerleaders for Johnson throughout this sorry saga. They backed him when he broke the law. They backed him when he lied. They backed him when he mocked the sacrifices of the British people. So they have been complicit as he has disgraced his office and let down his country. And frankly, if they had a shred of integrity, they would have gone months ago.
I think that, cabinet members that have suddenly found a conscience, that's all well and good, but I think the rest of the cabinet need to go now and need to do the right thing by the British public. It's pretty obvious that Boris Johnson's not fit to be Prime Minister, and I'm glad that some of the cabinet are starting to grow a backbone and realise that.
All right, then let's see if we can talk to our correspondent in the British capital, Juliana Olayinka. Juliana, good morning to you. This, for those who've been watching, probably did not come as a surprise, but what are you learning now this morning? I know the Prime Minister is expected to answer questions in Parliament this morning.
Good morning, Laddie. Well, it's been an extraordinary 24 hours, and there are so many layers to the political scandal engulfing SW1 at the moment that, forgive me if I chop and change between contexts, because there's just so much of it. I think you pretty much outlined what shocked everybody last night, and that was the resignation of two of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's most senior ministers, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary. This was within 10 minutes of each other, and it started with a bombshell tweet from Sajid Javid. And as you quite rightly said, both were ripping into his character and the Conservative Party, and they just didn't feel as if they could stand by the Prime Minister anymore. Lots of ministers were on resignation watch last night. One in particular, Nadine Zahari. Now, he was once an Iraqi a migrant who came to this country at the age of 10, speaking no English, rose up the ranks to become the vaccine minister at a time when the country was really deep in the COVID crisis. He then went on to become the education secretary, and at the 11th hour last night we heard that he has now become the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Apparently it was a toss-up between himself and Liz Truss, who is the Foreign Secretary, but Nadine Zahari told the Prime Minister that I will be resigning if you do not give me this post, and he has got this post. And now some people do believe that because of this new post, he may indeed keep the Prime Minister in number 10 for at least a couple of days. We've got to see what happens at PMQs today. It is going to be a showdown, really embarrassing day for the Prime Minister, because of course last month 44% of his own MPs voted that they had no confidence in him. Now two of his most staunch allies have resigned, and he is pretty much on the ropes. We heard just now that track from Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour opposition party, and I think lots of people do agree with him. The government is collapsing around Boris Johnson, and the fact that just when you want to be coming out of COVID and just when you are in the middle of the worst inflation crisis in a generation, that your two key ministers resign just doesn't speak well for you.
Now, I must, of course, ask that it's not just within Britain that people will be looking at all of this. One country that will be looking very, very worried at this point will be the Ukrainians, who have been staunchly supported by Britain all through the war situation, and they'll be watching all of this very closely. But let's talk about the possibility of a snap election. There are those who have overnight already said that there should be a snap election within the next 2 weeks, that it isn't enough for Mr. Johnson to step down. Plus, we have heard this several times in the last weeks and months, that he was on the ropes only for him to recover. So there are those who will ask, why should this be different?
There are those that will ask, why should this be different? But let's talk about Ukraine first. You're absolutely right. Of course, Volodymyr Zelensky has a key ally in Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's visited Ukraine, Kyiv, twice now. He wants to believe that he is the leader of the Western Front against Vladimir Putin, though I think you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody in France, Germany, Italy or America that say they're taking, their lead from Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But, he has been a key ally, very vocal. Is that necessarily going to change if Prime Minister Boris Johnson is ousted? I don't think so. If you ever get to watch PMQs, and I would say to everybody, do try and tune in today at 12 o'clock. You can watch it on the PMQ's YouTube feed. I think people would say that it's a cross-party effort. Most, I would say 99% of people, ministers that sit within the Palace of Westminster would be doing exactly what Boris Johnson is doing when it comes to his fight against Vladimir Putin and being a close ally to Volodymyr Zelensky. So no matter what happens, that won't change. Will there be a snap general election? Well, that may work in the favour of the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, because, of course, a couple of weeks ago, when the Prime Minister was in Rwanda attending Chogum, those two key by-elections, were lost. They were two key Conservative seats, one on the Red Wall, which was a loss to the Labour Party, and another in a pretty safe seat in the southeast of England. That was lost. It was in the southwest of England, I apologise. That was lost to the Liberal Democrats. So if there was an election now, would the British public turn their back on Prime Minister Boris Johnson? You have to look at the polls, and there was a poll very late last night from YouGov, and it did show that 69% of the British public do want Prime Minister Boris Johnson to resign. That's the highest percentage of resignation that he has had from the British public since he took office. A lot of people have been talking about that 2019 80-seat majority, something the Conservative Party haven't had since the late Margaret Thatcher was in office. But did people really know Boris Johnson then? I think people did obviously sort of have an affinity towards him when he was the cheeky chappy, jolly mayor of London. But I don't think they realised the extent of how much people disliked him, how much people were accusing him of lying. And they've seen that. They saw the revelations in the Sue Gray report. They've seen how he's handled, standards in public life. We haven't even spoken about Chris Pincher, a deputy chief whip, who the Prime Minister decided to give a promotion when he knew there were long-standing allegations against him regarding sexual harassment. There are so many issues that dog the Prime Minister. He is trying to stay on. If you listen to any of his biographers or close allies that have been doing their rounds on British media, they say he is not a man to quit. So he would have to be dragged out of there kicking and screaming, which is why we are expecting a lot of senior MPs to be knocking on the door of Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, to say the rules need to be changed. He needs to be out. Nobody has any confidence in him anymore.
Thank you so much, Juliana, for the context provided. Of course, we'll be in touch with you throughout the course of the day as this story develops. But for now, thanks. After the break, Norway intervenes to end a strike by oil and gas workers. Please go on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ukrainian forces are taking up new defensive lines in Donetsk, where they still control main cities after Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed victory in neighboring Luhansk province. Mr. Putin told his troops to absolutely rest and recover their military preparedness ahead of a renewed offensive on the industrial region. Pavlo Kyrylenko, the governor of Donetsk, said the towns of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk have been shelled overnight, and now the main line of assault of the enemy is those two towns. There's no safe place without shelling in Donetsk region. Russia has demanded that Ukraine hand Luhansk and Donetsk, known together as the Donbass, to pro-Moscow separatists. And at least 2 people have been killed and 7 more injured amidst Russian bombardment of Sloviansk. The governor there, Pavlo Kyrylenko, made this known via telegram. Moscow's forces had targeted the city market, with Mr. Kyrylenko urging local people to evacuate. It was not immediately clear what munitions had been used in the attack on the frontline city or how many people had been at the market when it was hit. Police said the market had been closing for the day, but that some shops had still been open when it was hit. Meanwhile, as Russia intensifies attacks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says air alerts rang out across almost all of Ukraine yesterday night as he calls again for a modern, effective air defense system. He says there were attacks in the Kremlinsky region of western Ukraine, the central region of Dnipropetrovsk, at the border region of Sumy, and the Black Sea port of Mykolaiv. In the Donetsk region, the governor says Russian forces killed 5 civilians and injured another 21. 2 people were said to have been killed in the town of Advitka, 1 in the city of Sloviansk, 1 in the town of Krasnorivka, and 1 in the town of Kurakov. Pavlo Kyrylenko is the quote of all of this. It's not clear whether the deaths in Sloviansk were in addition to the 2 people Kyrylenko had earlier mentioned were killed on the attack in the market and residential areas of the city, or whether the official death toll had changed. And food and energy security will figure prominently in a meeting of G20 foreign ministers in Bali this week. And the group's members are supposed to insist that Russia support UN efforts to reopen sea lanes blocked by Moscow's war in Ukraine. According to Ramin Chuli, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken would raise energy security in the main G20 minister session on Friday and in bilateral meetings in Bali. Referring to an initiative to try to get Ukrainian and Russian foodstuffs and fertilizer to global markets, he said G20 countries should hold Russia accountable and insist that it should support ongoing UN efforts to reopen the sea lanes for grain delivery. The top U.S. diplomat for East Asia, Daniel Crittenbrink, told the same briefing he expected a candid exchange on Ukraine when Blinken meets China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines. Also, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will call on G20 nations this week to put pressure on Russia to support UN efforts to reopen sea lanes blocked by the Ukraine conflict and repeat warnings to China not to support Moscow's war effort. Mr. Blinken heads to Asia today for a meeting of the ministers. His trip will include his first meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi since October, but no meeting is expected with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price had said he does not expect any meeting between Mr. Blinken and Mr. Lavrov at this week's meeting. And now we can continue our focus on the issue of medical certificates, recognition and non-recognition from Ukraine in the aftermath of this war that we have been covering. Today, we're talking to yet another student who is in her 6th year this time, talking about Eniola Badijo. Eniola is in Lagos. Good morning to you, Eniola. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, sir.
How did this news come to you that you're in your 6th year, about rounding up, and at the end of it, you escaped with your life from Ukraine, you're back home, you're completing the part of it that's remaining online, as far as I know, and but we're told that because of that, when you're done, the certification will not be recognized for you to practice in Nigeria.
Okay, so it came to us as a shock because I think like 2 weeks prior to that, we're still like arguing with our school on how to get our certificate sent to us because they insisted on us coming back to Ukraine, returning back to Ukraine. So we were still in the middle of that, and then we heard the news. So it was really like a shock for us from like one problem to another. So it was really shocking.
Given that scenario, of course, we have since heard that if you transfer to another university where you're able to go in person to complete the course of study, then the situation might be different. Did you hear about that? And if so, is it a viable option for someone like you who is just a few months from concluding the entire program?
Oh, for me, I'm done with school. So I'm done. I already wrote my exams. So I'm just waiting for my certificate. But for others, it's actually very difficult because their transcripts are not even being released and all our original documents are with school. So it's really difficult right now. So I don't think it's an option until the school approves. But for now, there's really no option than to wait for the school's approval to release transcripts willingly.
Given that, as you've just explained, of course, for you, you're done. You just need this certificate. But the certificate you will now collect from what we have discussed will not be recognized here. So what's then the next step? Are you guys getting together, for example, to make representation to the authorities to say, look, this is an unfair decision, or you need to take a look at this again?
We're trying to reach out to them because if going by their reason, then I think it's been unfair because class of 2020 graduated online and class of 2021 graduated online. So I think it's really unfair to us because we didn't cause this, we didn't cause the war, and it's not something we could have avoided. So I think they're being unfair towards them, towards to us right now. So they should please consider us, because it's not our fault, and we can't, like 6 years can't just go to waste like that.
Have you been able to speak to any of your, not necessarily colleagues, but people in a similar situation as you, either those who are completing their studies this year or those who are possibly in the 5th year and who have just a year or so to go and who are in your situation? They've had to leave Ukraine because of the war. If you've spoken to any of them, what are they telling you? What are the options that they are being offered or that are being suggested?
Okay, for now, people, so for the people I know, most are not considering like transferring, because they don't know where exactly they're going to start from, and school is not releasing transcripts. And the only option school is giving is, if you want your transcript, then you're going to be expelled. So it's really a tough situation. So it's either they face expulsion or they, I mean, that's like the only expulsion that's going to, this is only on expulsion schools going to release their certificate. So no one is willing to risk being expelled. So most people are just waiting for school to resume right now.
But I mean, if you are expelled, that
Yes,
being
sir.
expelled from a school is not an administrative procedure. It is a disciplinary action. It is, you are expelled because you've done something wrong. So if you are expelled, can you naturally expect that following your being expelled, you would then be handed your transcript to move to another university? What will you tell them at the new university has happened if you have been expelled from the current one?
I don't know. So I don't know really, but it's just that's the role school is giving. If you want your transcript, then you have to be expelled. So you have to write a letter to school asking them to expel you. So it's really a tricky situation. So no one is willing to try it yet. So everyone's just waiting for school to resume.
Now, when you get your certificate at the end of it, because I've spoken to some of your colleagues, and this time I mean your own colleagues, your classmates, those who are on the verge of completing it, and many of them say, well, what has happened is that our minds have been made up for us, because what it essentially means is that we will not be staying here to practice. That means that the option of practicing in Nigeria is foreclosed. I will go abroad. I'll go back abroad. Is that something that you are also considering?
No, I'm not considering that. I'm just waiting for I'm still waiting for MTN to say something, because I want to practice in Nigeria.
The whole idea, of course, being that you went to get this training because you wanted to impact on your country.
Yes, sir.
And now that country is not allowing you to do so.
Yes, sir.
It is a tough situation. Of course, we will keep on with you. We will keep tabs on this developments and to see how this plays out. But for now, let me just thank you, Eniola Badejo, for your time this morning on the program.
Very much, sir.
Thank you. Ukraine has asked Turkey to help investigate 3 Russian-flagged ships as part of Kiev's efforts to probe what it alleges is the theft of grain from Russian-occupied territory. According to official documents, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office asked Turkey's Justice Ministry to investigate and provide evidence on the 3 named ships it suspects have been involved in transporting grain allegedly stolen from recently occupied Ukrainian territories such as Kherson. The letter said the ships traveled from Crimea's main grain terminal in Sevastopol in April and May and pressed Ankara to obtain documentation about their cargo and arrival at Turkish ports more recently. All 3 large dry bulk carriers, Mikhail Nenashev, Matros Pozanich, and Matros Koshka, are owned by a subsidiary of a Western-sanctioned Russian state-owned company called United Shipbuilding Corporation, according to Equisis, a shipping database. And IKEA opened for business for a final time in Russia, with customers permitted to buy goods in an online-only fire sale before the Swedish furniture company winds down its operations in a market to which it hopes one day to return. It was not possible to add items to the online basket as of 11 a.m. in Moscow. Selling surplus inventory and generating revenue in Russia may raise eyebrows, given the public and political pressure on companies not to do business there. IKEA still operates 14 malls in the country under the mega brand, though it said it is exploring options for its 17 furniture stores there, which remain closed. Scores of companies have suspended operations in Russia since Moscow sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in late February in what it termed a special military operation. And the Norwegian government has intervened to end a strike in the petroleum sector that had caught oil and gas output, and that's according to a union leader and the Labour Ministry, ending a stalemate that could have worsened Europe's energy supply crunch. Norwegian offshore oil and gas workers went on strike over pay yesterday, the first day of planned industrial actions that are threatened to cut the country's gas exports by almost 60% and exacerbate supply shortages linked to the Ukrainian war. The Norwegian Oil and Gas Employees Lobby said that by Saturday, the strike would have cut daily gas exports by more than 1 million barrels oil equivalent, while 341,000 barrels of oil would have been lost. In a worst-case scenario, Belgium and Britain would not have received any piped Norwegian gas from Saturday because of the risk of a shutdown at Sleipner, a gas transportation hub in the North Sea. And still to come, International Ice Hockey Federation dismisses Russia and Belarus appeals against a ban. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the program. Let's talk to Larry Williams of our business desk to unpack some of the business stories. Norway dodged a bullet and oil prices recovered.
Yeah, big recovery this morning because yesterday I saw that the price of Brent and WTI actually dropped below the $100 mark, which was quite unprecedented. Nobody expected that to happen. By the end of the day, was, the same fears, in this market, recession fears. Traders, they look at these headlines and they make their trades according to that. Right. But some analysts say these traders actually overreacted, yesterday dropping the price, below that mark. But now we saw this morning, traders went back in and they bought up in most of those cheap oil, and now it's trading about $105, for Brent. But some analysts still say, the same concerns still remain, in that market because the recession fears are still very strong in the market at this point. Once that hits, we've already seen the U.S. yield curve already pointing that the recession could actually be coming for the U.S. That's one of the triggers, they look at to gauge recession, coming and all of that. So at the end of the day, we're seeing also supply issues, in this market, still quite volatile. Tomorrow you see another headline talking about, demand issues, and you see the price goes down. Yeah. Next thing, it's supply disruptions. Like we see how Norway were able to dodge that massive strike that that was supposed to happen. By the end of the day, it's still quite a volatile market. Traders are still, sentiments. There's still a lot of volatility, pushing sentiment with traders right there. So at the end of the day, we can expect more volatility in the market. But some analysts say oil might actually go below the $100 and stay below $100 to about maybe $65 per barrel. That would be good news because we've seen how that's impacted, energy costs globally. Right. also stoking, food issues in the world. So it remains to be seen if that actually happens, and it will be a welcome idea. But obviously, the traders won't like that.
And I'm not too sure the producing countries would either, because they're maxing out at the moment.
Yeah,
they're making a killing at the moment. The UK is introducing further sanctions against Belarus this time.
Yeah,
not Russia.
Not Russia. We've been talking about the secondary sanctions, and obviously we know how much Belarus and Russia, how much alliance they have, right now. And at the end, the UK is saying, you know what, if you're going to be supporting what Russia is doing in Ukraine, you're going to get sanctioned. And we're seeing them, bring up some financial sanctions on Belarus. Also trade sanctions too, making sure that import-exports between Belarus and the UK, put some strain in there, making Belarusian exports quite not palatable for the UK at this point. So at the end of the day, they're trying to sap out, some of the revenue they get from their trade. That's talking about Belarus. And we know the Belarusian president, he's backing Putin, and we don't see him, backing down even with these sanctions. These countries are already used to these sanctions, and they're still, carrying on.
They're still supporting, and they're supporting
and going on, with
the Belarusian president was asking the Russian president for missiles earlier last week.
Yeah, so we'll see that continue, and we're seeing UK take their stance now, and other allies will take, the same, position against Belarus. So it's not looking too good for Belarus at this point.
How did the markets fare yesterday? I remember that on Monday it started off on a bright note.
Yeah,
we almost brought out the glasses, but
exactly.
You said hold the horses. Let's see it for a second day. So how did they do yesterday?
They still did good, yesterday. But I still keep my eyes on Thursday, Friday, because that's when you see all the major sell-offs. And we still have that major jobs report coming on Friday in the U.S. That's also gonna push sentiment in the market, but at this point, we're seeing Europe is still, they traded good yesterday in the green, talking about the FTSE, the CAC, and in the U.S., this morning we're seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average futures, S&P 500 futures, all in the green, signaling that, traders are still excited, at this point. And also the crypto market, we're seeing Bitcoin still maintain, 20,000 at this point after losing that mark. So even though there's still extreme fear in that market and major equities markets, right now traders are on risk off. But the bear rallies they will always come, the bear rallies. But now some traders are going to get caught up in that, and we're going to get,
and then ride it to a point, then fall off.
Exactly. But some analysts still believe, these are good times to come into that market, try and, buy some of those dips, dollar cost averaging. By the end of the day, some traders say, we do not have money to buy this dip. Where a recession
we already
is
lost
coming.
so much.
We've lost so much. There's still fears of, rising inflation and, tightening at this point. So as I keep saying, it's not an easy time, to be an investor, in most of these markets. But if you were trading commodities, you'll be smiling. But who knows? That might be peaking at this point. So it's quite tough. It's quite tough, navigating these markets these days.
You're absolutely right. But let's zero in, shall we, before I let you go, on the Nigerian market. Right. How's that doing? Because it had a bearish run over the last week or so. And
the bears are back again. We saw it opened, it closed in the red on Monday. And, yesterday we're seeing profit taking, even though it's the best performing, market globally at this point, because we're pushing over plus 20%, at this point. Other markets cannot boast of this, but it's expected that, some traders want to take profit. Right. And we're seeing that happen. So it's not bearish yet, but traders are still like
they're watching their backs.
Watching their backs, because you never know. It's been a great first half. Who knows what the second half is going to bring at this point? So we're seeing cautious optimism in that market.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Ladi, for that perspective.
Thank you.
Of course, we'll have updates of that in Business Morning and Business Incorporated. Exactly. You and Ini, John McQuarrie, will be unpacking far more.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for that. Let's take a look at some of the sports coming out of the situation in Ukraine. The International Ice Hockey Federation disciplinary panel has dismissed an appeal against the suspension of the national teams of Russia and Belarus from its competitions. The International Ice Hockey Federation had ruled in February in response to the two nations' invasion of Ukraine that the Russian and Belarusian national teams and clubs would be suspended from all competitions until further notice. Russia are unable to compete in the Women's World Championships due to begin in Denmark next month. In its ruling dismissing the appeal, the panel concluded that the measure was a safety policy rather than a sanction. The panel also ruled that the decision to withdraw hosting rights to the 2023 Men's Ice Hockey World Championships and the 2023 World Junior Ice Hockey Championships from Russia were legitimate. The All England Lawn Tennis Club is to appeal the fine handed to Wimbledon organizers by the Women's Tennis Association for their decision to ban tennis players from Russia and Belarus in response to the invasion of Ukraine. The Lawn Tennis Association, Britain's governing body for tennis, is expected to appeal a fine too, sanctioned for denying players from these countries from competing at Eastbourne, Nottingham and Birmingham in the build-up to the Grand Slam. A total of $750,000 was given as fines to the LTA, while $250,000 was handed to the AELTC in fines. And finally, today, young soccer players in the city of Kharkiv are grieving over the death of their coach, killed by a Russian shell last week in an incident that highlights the heavy toll the war is inflicting on Ukrainian sports, as indeed on all other areas of society. Players taking part in a match staged in honor of Andrei Doroshev, who died on June the 27th, paid tribute to their coach, who died when shells slammed into a residential area of Ukraine's second biggest city. Long proud of its achievements in gymnastics, boxing, soccer and other sports, Ukraine is now counting the terrible cost of the war in its fifth month on its sporting infrastructure and on its sportsmen and women. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who hosted the head of the IOC in Kyiv, said more than 100,000 Ukrainian sportspeople have not had the opportunity to train. Many have had to join the armed forces, while hundreds of sports facilities have been destroyed. And that's how we end our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeredoluwale. There's an update within the world today at 5 o'clock later in the day. Please watch out for that. And the show is back tomorrow at 9. To have yourselves a beautiful midweek ahead. Good morning.